Hello everyone, I hope you're really well. I'm just going live on Thursday afternoon, evening, and we're talking about work and cancer today, as you know. Decided to start this theme in the group because work and cancer is something that comes up for lots of us, particularly because many of us aren't yet at retirement age. It may have been suggested to many of us that we would retire early, but that's not the case, and that's not how we necessarily want to do things. So work and cancer becomes a big part of our life. It's a part of our identity, it's part of who we are before we had cancer, and it's part of who we are following our cancer experience. And when I say work, I can mean things like unpaid employment, I might mean freelancing, I might mean employment somewhere, I might mean a mixture of the two, I might mean flexi-time, we might mean full-time. There's all sorts of ways of being employed, and how we class our own employment is really up to us. So when we talk about work and cancer, we're going to go across the broad spectrum of how we think about work. Most likely we'll define it as how we spend our non-leisure time, really. So if you start to think of it in that way, then we can perhaps understand what kind of work it is that we're doing now or that we want to work towards. Today's video, I wanted to do a bit of background on my own work story, just to give some context really, and to tell you a little bit about the journey, let's use that word, that I've had in my cancer experience and a little bit before it as well. But the reason I'm doing that as well is so that I can show you a really lovely exercise. If any of you have been coached by me, we might have done this exercise before, but don't let that put you off. If you'd like to try it again, it can be a really nice one to do at any point. And if you haven't done this exercise before, then I just recommend following along with me as I'm talking about how to fill it in. You'll see me filling it in for myself, which will partly explain my own work and cancer experience, but I'll encourage you to do it for yourselves as well, and perhaps go away and do it, or do it along with me. And if you even wanted to post your results in the live chat, then let us know, because that's always really interesting, seeing how everyone else has found their experience. I understand that that's a bit of a personal thing to do. You'll also notice today that I'm sitting in a hotel room with some fancy some of these behind me. It was the only background I could find that would be useful. So what's been my work and cancer story, my work and cancer experience? Before I had cancer, I was working in the NHS in public health. I was working on a number of health programmes that were supporting people in the community. I worked a lot with the children and young people teams in the NHS, and we used to design health services in order to provide the best healthcare for children and young people and their families. That was particularly in Islington, in the borough of Islington, and if you don't know Islington, it's a kind of an interesting London borough. It's very rich and very poor, lots of diversity, lots of people coming into and going out of the borough as well. So we had lots of interesting ways of trying to support people to access those services. A lot of that was around things like how we can get kids to be healthy in school, so I worked on the Healthy Schools programme. Did a lot of things around behaviour change, set up a stop smoking service for young people and their parents as well, which was really interesting actually. I loved that piece of work. And then as I was getting a bit more senior, I guess you could say, I started to work away from being in the community and travelling up and down the borough and writing a bit more around reports and doing some analysis on numbers, providing kind of feedback to people about how programmes were run and how we evaluated them and how much money they cost and things. But I suppose that feels relevant to me because it's always been around health, and it's always been around improving people's health and supporting them to take behaviours that keep them healthy and well. That was up until I was 30, and then I was diagnosed with cancer at that point. So what I'm going to do is bring in the diagram that I'm going to start to get you to draw if you have a pen and a piece of paper on you already. If you have your pen and piece of paper, I want you to draw a scale with your X and your Y. Now this is going to come out back to front because I'm on the screen this way. But you're going to have your scale going up here, and you're going to have your scale going along here. The scale going along here is going to be time. So you're going to write time on there. This axis here is going to be another measure. So I'm going to ask you to have a think about, and you can change it when you're doing it, you might think actually is a different measure I'd like to use. But when you're using it, I'm going to ask you to think about what measure you might give yourself over the course of time for your work. Now, an interesting one, or perhaps an easy one to start with, is happiness at work. Another one you might want to do is maybe there's something about seniority at work, or where I'm at in my work, where I feel I'm at. So let's start with just one of the easiest ones, which is happiness at work. And I'm going to do my rating on that as well. So happiness at work. And happiness can really mean I'm contented, I'm happy with the position I'm in, I'm happy with where I'm at, the people around me. You know, you can decide how you interpret that measure. And even if you do one measure when we're doing this together, or when you go away and do it on your own, you can choose another measure another time. So for this purposes, we're going to do time and happiness. So I told you that I was in the NHS. I was there for nearly 10 years. So if we imagine that I look at my time before I had cancer, I was quite happy with my job. I had to kind of interview to get a bit more, you know, move up the ranks. Sometimes I found it quite stressful, working in quite an environment where there was lots of pressure. Obviously at that point the NHS was starting to talk a lot about how much money they didn't have. So that was a bit of pressure, and there were things like targets and always office politics as well that we all get. So that kind of brought things down a bit, but on the whole I was really happy and liked where I was going. So if we imagine that I'm kind of starting off and I'm increasing, and then just before I had cancer there was quite a big announcement, which I think it was Andrew Lansley had started talking about the NHS moving into public health, moving into councils. There was lots of uncertainty. There was a lot of stress in the environment I was working in, lots of unknowns, people started to leave, and that became quite stressful to be around. And of course you then wonder, should I leave, should I stay? So that brought my measure down. So let's just go to here. There's me. So this is time, and this is my happiness at work. Generally it kind of increased over time, with maybe some bumps, but it was an increase. And then as about 6 months to a year before I had cancer, it started to get a little bit stressful and a bit, I guess, nerve-wracking and worrying, because I didn't really want to leave at that point. And then I had cancer. So for your own, you're going to just do a dotted line at the point that you had your diagnosis, and this will be here for me. So what happened then for my own experience was I was off sick, and I was off sick for a long time. This isn't as long as it might be for other people or someone else, and it may be a lot longer than someone else is used to, but this was my experience. I was off for, was it 15 months. I remember it being 15 months because of something somebody said to me when I returned back to my job. So I was off for 15 months. I had thought I'd be off for 6. I then had thought I'd be off for about 9, and I then very much made the decision to not go back until I'd had the third of the surgeries that I'd had. So most of you know I had bowel cancer. I had 2 abdominal surgeries and a stoma, and then had the stoma reversed, which had complications and added to the time. I probably would have gone back about just under a year, but it added to my recovery time, and I had to put weight on and all sorts. So that was me off. So for mine, and yours may not look like this, but for mine there's definitely a gap. So my work wasn't anywhere, I was just off. Now I could say we could measure it on happiness with how I was with my work experience as I was off, but we're not going to measure it. I won't measure mine. So there's a gap basically. So then I'm going to do another dotted line for when I, for work purposes, looked at when I was returning. That dotted line may be for you, you know, right now. It might be in the present. So this is obviously right now at the end of your graph. But mine was, you know, 6 years ago now. So I can say what's happened after that time, if you see what I mean. So for this time I was off. I was just ill. That was hard because I definitely had an identity with how I worked, and it felt like a very difficult sort of way of being. I think I wasn't a good sick person. I didn't enjoy it, as most of us don't, but I didn't really take advantage of it all the time, probably because it just wasn't very well, which I'm sure many of us experience, but I'm sure there were days where things were very relaxed and very chilled. But sometimes I suppose in the bigger picture of things, when you're going through pain and all sorts of things, it's harder to see that. But anyway, for work purposes, I was off. So that's not going on that's not there. So I returned, and I returned back on a phased return, which the NHS was very good at. It had, slick policies about how often I should go in. I remember meeting with my manager, who was really lovely, and I was friends with him. And they'd set out days for me about when I would return. And I remember the first day I went back, meeting with a few people, and the second day, which would have been a week later. So for me, it was incremental. It was meant to be 1 day, 1 week, 2 days the next week, 3 days the following week, 4 days after that, and then full time, 5 weeks later. I remember at the time when I heard that plan thinking, that feels a bit overwhelming. I can't picture it, I can't imagine it, but I'm sure it's fine. I mean, I'm sure it's what's recommended and I'm sure it's okay, but I remember not feeling that was going to be a easy thing. And I remember on the second day I had a meeting with my manager, who, as I said, was very open, and I liked him, and he was very au fait with policies. And I know this doesn't always happen because some employers don't know anything about how they're meant to support someone who's coming back from cancer or going off with cancer. But I remember saying to him, I think I might need to think about how I go slightly less full time. So I suppose I was saying, can I go part time? And I remember him looking at me kind of horrified that I was even questioning that I would be part-time, which was the first hint for me that something wasn't quite right, that this wasn't going to feel quite how I needed it to feel. And of course I felt guilty because I felt like they'd been so supportive for absolutely months and months, over a year, that of course I had to help them and go back and be a good employee. As it turns out, I got quite sick again, and through my stoma scarring, found that I wasn't very well. I really wasn't well enough to have gone back, and I had to go back off sick again. So that was interesting for someone who really found work their identity, had been off for 15 months, had really tried, and I was very anxious to try, but found that I couldn't, and my health was compromised by going into work, by travelling, by trying to be in this place, and also worrying a lot, finding it very anxiety inducing that I was going to have to be full-time in this supposed 5-6 weeks time. I actually went back off sick, and I seem to remember that was for about 6 weeks or so, and at that point when we were looking again, so let's just do this on the diagram, I went back probably half as happy as I was when I had left all those 15 months ago, and I absolutely dipped. I went right down. So that was me going off sick again, and that was me going, I don't think I can do this, I find this really strange. Oh, the other thing was that I'd been working, as I said, in sort of community health services, and had been put sitting opposite where the bowel cancer resources were for all the bowel cancer teams, and I remember just thinking, this is kind of a strange sign, I just don't think I can be here, which you might think is an irony given the work I do now, but it was just so soon, it was so very soon. So I was off, and then eventually made the decision with a lot of trepidation, a lot of questioning, a lot of hand-holding from people around me, a lot of asking lots of questions, seeing a career coach, and realising that it wasn't going to be right. But I didn't want to not be in employment, and I didn't want to just suddenly, I felt a lot like there'd be this huge gap on my CV, which I can look back on now and think, isn't that a funny thing to think? But we think those things because we're nervous that that's going to impact our future employment. And it's a genuine concern that lots of us have, like, how do I promote myself or tell people that I'm hardworking if it looks like I've just done nothing? Even though, of course, your logical brain is saying, yeah, but you had cancer, or you were ill from cancer as well. So anyway, I then found the most interesting sort of position in a small charity, and I moved to Carers UK, where I was running a new service, helping to set that up, and I was incredibly excited. I interviewed, I told them about the cancer quite it right in the interview because it felt relevant, because it felt like it was appropriate, because it was about caring and I had been cared for. And I've also supported other people at that point with their own cancer experience. And so for me, I was quite open straight away. And I know one of the other questions that comes up is, should I mention my cancer to an employer? That is something we'll tackle a little bit later when we talk with Charlotte, our HR professional, and it varies. There's no hard and fast rule, is one of the things that we'll talk about. But for me, I did tell them, and I got that position. It was on about half the salary, but I had asked if I could be 3.5 days a week straight away, and they had allowed that. And that's probably because the funding for that project wasn't permanent, so it was easier for them to do that rather than have a permanent position that they needed to fill full time. So the conditions of that were more right for what I needed at the time. Obviously it was nerve-wracking, but I felt very, very excited and very energised, and felt like everything was possible because it was this new situation. It didn't feel like I was going back, like I was trying to repeat things, like I was trying to tell my cancer story to everybody that I didn't always want to. It felt like it was new, and it was a clean break, and it was exciting. That was an amazing time. So this is really when it went very exciting. It probably went higher, I think, than even it had done before there. It felt like it was really, I feel it, and it was really exciting. So that project was amazing, and I loved the people I worked with. It was hard work. Because it was a new service, it was very frenetic and lots of kind of new stress, which I could feel that my body was dealing with, but I also think that I wasn't quite aware of how much I was internalising some of it, so it did make me quite anxious. And what happened then was the project itself kind of changed. We set up the service, and we tested it, set up the service, and then the way it was being integrated into the organisation was different to how I thought I would work in it. And I decided, again, quite difficultly, that it wasn't going to be the right thing for me to stay in to run it, because the position was changing quite a lot. So I knew that I wanted to work in a slightly different way. This is quite interesting because here it sort of went down a bit because it got very stressful. There's a notice a pattern here, and I was really trying to make it work and wanted to fit in with how it was going to change, but I felt very strongly that it wasn't going to be right. So you could start talking about gut feelings here if you like, things that didn't feel right, but it depends on how you measure things. This is how I measured things. I probably wish I'd made decisions a lot quicker along this way. I probably wish I hadn't have spent so long questioning whether I should have left. Probably wish I hadn't spent so long perhaps going down in the role. But anyway, those are the things I did. So we got to this point and decided that this wasn't going to be right, and an opportunity came up to do some freelance work through somebody I'd met at this job. And that felt amazing. That felt like, okay, maybe this is going to be an interesting way of segueing into the work that I'd like to do, which is more independent. And I think by this point I'd started to really understand that I wanted to work with lots of different people and work with lots of different organisations. And the theme always had been health, and it always had been, you know, supporting in that way, but I just knew that I wanted to work in a different way, and it perhaps felt like I was caged. I actually remember writing an email saying I feel a bit caged. Now I can't remember if I wrote that to someone senior, but I must have written it somewhere. Don't always advise that you do that. But anyway, I wanted to feel less caged. So an opportunity to go freelance came up, and so this was kind of going down, but then that was really exciting, and I started working freelance on a couple of digital health projects, which were very exciting and also very fast-paced, and you know, lots of different organisations. It was Skype, Macmillan, and about 2 other kind of parts of charity and a digital organisation as well, which was fantastic. And as a result of that freelance work, which was heavy duty and sometimes quite stressful. So instead of that being a line that goes up like that, I would probably say it's a line that goes like that a little bit. But from that connection, I then met the people at Macmillan who were employing for a role that was also new and in the innovation team, and it was kind of brought in some of the skills that I had before. So I felt like this was a really interesting opportunity. Freelancing was amazing, but it is it's nerve-wracking, and it also probably added to things like worry about where I was going to be and how I was going to, you know, stick with a contract kind of thing. It did also feel like it was still relying on someone else to provide me with the work, and I think at this point I really wanted to be able to bring in experience and perhaps even start, not necessarily my own thing, but start something that I felt more in control of. So to harness that energy and that drive. So this was when I then felt like this was a really exciting opportunity, and it might be really right, and it's kind of leading in the direction that I want to go in. So I worked there at Macmillan, and that was fantastic. Some of you may have heard this story before as well, but ironically Macmillan is an incredibly stressful place to work. They also hadn't really dealt with someone like me, would you believe, who was coming back from a cancer experience, and so all of the Macmillan policies that other organisations use, they were having to use on themselves with me, which was quite interesting. I got to know the HR department quite well, and the job was fantastic. It was an innovation and sort of service stuff, and helping people to, it's really where the coaching side for me came out, even though it felt like I'd done that in different places across the career. It felt like I was able to really provide those coaching services for a number of people. So I felt very inspired there, but as an organisation it wasn't going to be where I knew that I could work full time, or at that point I was 4 days a week. So as you can see, here's a little trend here, isn't it? I mean, that went up and then it very much went down because it was too much. The role was too pressurised. I wasn't sleeping. I know that there was a lot of stuff happening outside of work that I wanted to be able to manage as well. And I think at this point I'd started to really feel that there was something in this whole freelance part of my work that felt really comforting and happy, because it felt that there was more control, and I felt like maybe I could do some, I don't like to use the word do more good because it sounds a bit patronising, but sort of in that sense work in a different way that felt like it would be required or needed, if you see what I mean, rather than following lots of huge multi-million pound projects kind of thing. Not that I ever managed a multi-million pound project, I've got to say. Anyway, this went down at Macmillan, and I took time out at this point in order to assess where I was, assess how I was feeling, assess what this idea that I'd had for a number of years might be, assess some of the notes that I'd used with the career coach that I'd seen all the way back here, and I looked back at those notes and it talked about working independently and about, you know, supporting people in a way that was right for them. It talked about setting up exciting projects that I could perhaps lead or do with other colleagues. And it certainly talked about working independently, but with organisations where needed. So it felt very much that this time here, having left, so you could say, I mean, I think I took about 2 months off here, and I'd had the savings in order to do that, because I know that this isn't, I say a luxury, I know that this isn't possible all the time, and I know that we can't make decisions just on always how we feel. We have to take into account so many other things going on for us as well. At this point I knew that I had a buffer, but I also knew that if I didn't do this I would not be well, and I would not be following the path, I suppose you could say, that I felt that I would be best. So here I took a break, and then this is where I started going back into my coaching work, going back into looking and ironically doing things like these exercises and bringing out the strengths that I felt that I'd had. What was it about these peaks, the peaks even in the troughs, that had been good? And this is fascinating because when you do this exercise yourself, I want you to, not just at the end, but as you're doing it, what is it about these peaks that you're finding that you absolutely are there, that are themes? Because those peaks in even some troughs will really help you to work out where in your career, where in your work life you've been the happiest, because this is the measure we're using here. If you're using another measure, it will be where you are, whatever measure you're using, the most senior or have the most money or whatever it is. And I realised that during the peaks, it was always when I'd had amazing collaboration with really good people and had just sparked with them. And there was always something in there about working individually with people and supporting them to make changes that were going to help them as well. And the irony of this kind of work isn't lost on me. I needed a lot of help myself through all of this. And, you know, in the coaching world, it's quite interesting because none of us are finished models, are we? None of us are vessels that we just are just ended. We need lots of support all the way through our lives, whoever we are, and probably people who are coaches or therapists or counsellors or whatever probably need not just the most, but need that support in order to I guess realise the things that they want to do as well. So I'm always hesitant to say, like, it sounds like, oh, I didn't succeed in these things, so I went and coached other people. It might be what you think, I don't know, but it's kind of more of a point of, it was always leading to that point. It was always being able to say, well, actually, I'm really pleased with the successes, and they always brought out what I do now. So let's flip forward to now, because I've left hardly any space here. So a year and a half or two ago, I changed my qualification. So I did a master's in health psychology and loved that. That is actually in there somewhere, so that was that point there as well, and wanted to really solidify some of the work I'd done there and make it into more coaching based. So did a diploma in coaching. Loved that. I absolutely loved that. If any of you are doing coaching, I think some of you are actually, it's just such an amazing time. It's really beautiful doing that. It's like you're being coached yourself anyway, so that's fantastic. So here I was taking a break, so I'm going to tiny bit of space here, but this up here is where I am now, and this is happiness. Running your own business is not the easiest thing in the world. You have to be pretend you have all this confidence when you might not. You have to be organised when you might not be. You have to have focus, real focus, because otherwise you just get overwhelmed. You have to think about how you're going to get money in whilst you're also testing things out that may not bring in money. You know, it's always a consideration, but it is your thing, and it's also, hopefully, if what you're doing is something that you love, it's showing other people that you love something. And let's use my example. So I'm coaching, and I hope that the work that I do helps other people in ways that sometimes they may not even recognise, I suppose, yet or ever, but that they feel that they're supported. So that is my happiness at work, and here I am now. It doesn't mean I don't have bad days or down days or difficult days, but I can absolutely tell you that it's happiness-wise is exponentially increased. And I think that I realise I'm talking all about myself, but I wanted to use my example as an example that you can take away and look at for your own tree. What do we call it? In fact, I haven't even called it a tree. Why am I calling it a tree? For your own kind of scale, there you go. And to acknowledge what it is about the high points that have been brilliant, and to see where the patterns lie, and to see where you are today. So time obviously goes up to where you are today. And some of you might still be off sick, if we're calling it off sick. Some of you may be unemployed. Some of you may be just about to go back to some employment or change your employment that you've returned to. There's so many different facets of this, but this little exercise is something to get you started on where you know you've been happy or not, or contented or not, or senior or not, whatever you want to use in your career. And I would suggest doing it a few years or so before cancer as well, so you've got something to compare it to, and do it right up to now. If any of you have got any thoughts about what I'm showing you there, I'd love to know. It'd be great to hear from you. This is something that I use in my coaching sessions at times when it's appropriate, and it can be obviously a really lovely visual tool to work through, and you can do it again at another time as well. Of course, you can do it again a year later to see where you're at from now. You can also do it way before cancer, so you know, perhaps even at school where happiness was. So it's a fascinating one in terms of looking at your emotions and how we feel about our work also. That is my work story, told in the form of an exercise that I hope you can use also. Next week's talk, I think, is also going to be at 5 o'clock, and that's going to be talking about what's right for me and am I ready. That could be interpreted in a number of ways. What's right for me in my job, or what's right for me to do now. And am I ready was really referring to, am I ready to either go back to work, to make a change right now? Am I ready to think about this even? So we'll do ask you some questions about what it might be like to discover whether you're ready or not, because a lot of stuff will come down to what feels right for us as well. The video after that, we're really lucky to have Charlotte, an HR professional who's also experienced cancer, with me in my studio, and she's going to be answering some of your questions, and we'll also be putting up some of the most common HR discussions that come up when we think about work and cancer. And I think there's likely to be 2 more sessions after that, so if we haven't covered values work in next week's video, we're going to do a video on values, and the following probably final video will be about taking action, what you can do to take action with the quandary or the issue or the work and cancer question that you have. So if you have any questions from this video, I would love you to post them underneath. You can either do that now or after, and I'll probably take a picture of this so that anyone watching later can see my lovely artwork. And there we are, there's what's the work story and an exercise that you can do. I hope that's really useful. Have a lovely evening, and I'll see you very soon. Bye.